Feels like July.
It is so hot.
Very humid. And I want to put the AC on, but the microphone hates it.
Our goal was to get our AC installed by July, and we just squeaked by. It is almost July. It is getting so hot on the East Coast, and we finally got our AC fully installed. We built a box for it, so it is a no-show AC unit. It does not stick out the side of our bus, and it runs on solar power, which was our biggest goal, was to create solar AC. This video has an accompanying downloadable plan, so make sure you go check that out, and we're gonna walk you through the steps that we did to build it and also how we tested it.
Buckle up, this one's a little complicated.
Right across this country into the starlight, 12,000 miles, turn back, do it again. No destination, it's just a journey. You were my lover and friend.
When we finished our 5-month bus build, it was in January of 2021, and we were not very motivated to test our AC system.
When it's 5 degrees outside and you have a list of things to do, it's not that important. It gets pushed down, and we just didn't finalize it until now.
Our biggest goal with this system was to have AC on solar power, which is the ultimate RV question. How do you get AC while boondocking, while being off-grid?
A lot of solar, a lot of battery, pretty much. It's the only way you can do it, and it's still pretty tough to pull off.
One of the biggest features of this design is that it has this no-show element, meaning that you can't see the window AC unit from the outside of the bus. The only thing that you see on the outside is the intake vent and the exhaust vent.
The goals for this, for me, a lot of it was like, can we just turn the AC on for a few hours on those really hot summer nights? After the sun's gone down, I'll be happy. Anything after that is a bonus.
If you ever lived in a van or a bus or any kind of vehicle, you know that the vehicle itself, the metal and everything that makes up the house just heats up when it's baking in the sun during the day, and then it just holds on to that heat. This bus does that, but our first van was really bad. One of our biggest goals was to be able to just cut that heat that the vehicle is holding on to at the end of the day. We're going to tell you how this AC functioned in the middle of the day, in the blazing sun, the amount that it reduced the temperature internally, and then we're also going to tell you how it performed in the evening when the sun was going down and we needed to cut that heat inside the bus. We started with the smallest unit that we could find, and that was a 5,000 BTU unit, because why take more power if you don't have to?
No need to start at like a 8,000, 10,000 BTU unit that's pulling between 700 and, I don't know, 900,000 watts. That's just a lot. Another goal when we were doing the build out for the box of the AC unit was to have at least some accessibility to get in and out of there if you needed to test something or pull the AC. The dividers between each part of the exhaust, the air intake, and then the air it's pushing out are just removable. And then from there you can grab the AC and pull it right out.
So you're able to pull these components out and get in there to check for any leaks or any problems. If you need to replace the AC unit, you can do that. We also wanted to design something that was affordable because AC options for RVs, there are some 12-volt units. You're getting into the thousands of dollars with these units. It like multiple thousands of dollars. They are so expensive, and I don't know about you guys, but we didn't have the budget for something like that. If you buy our downloadable plan, it gives you a full materials list, a full tools list of things you need to build this design in your own bus. For us, we had some of the materials already, and we had all the tools. So we spent about $470 on building this entire unit and box, the ceiling, all the venting.
Including the AC.
We got the AC unit for $120. off of Amazon Marketplace.
Either way, these units are relatively cheap. They range from $100 to $300, most of them. It is really cool to see there's finally some 12-volt AC units starting to come out. You're talking $2 to $3 grand from what I've seen for these systems. While they do work efficiently, and I think they probably work really well, that's just a pretty tough sticker price to stomach for most people. Alright guys, we're finally here. Time to finish the AC job. It's the super custom project. We are gonna get it done. You'll see back here I ran a 110 volt line. I can plug the AC into that directly, and there's also another outlet if you want it for something else. Before we were ready to put the AC into the compartment, we just set it up on some cardboard in our workshop and just ran it for I think 4 hours or more just to see if there was any condensation leaking. One of the plugs on the bottom of the pan was like not secured correctly, right?
It was where they had bolted some of the pieces together, and then they put a little plug over where the bolt was, and that was all within the drip pan, and so the water was leaking out of where that plug was. And so because it was on cardboard, you could see that it was leaking and that there was water there. So we just used a marine grade sealant, and I kind of put it around the little plug, and then it was good to go.
It's time to install our AC. This is a window unit. It usually will hang out of a window. We're not going to be doing that, so we have to build a box, and the main goal is to isolate the air intake and the exhaust. So all the exhaust will be pushing out through a ventilation system, and we'll be venting fresh air in.
Then it was time to move on to actually making our box. We are calling this an artificial environment box, and that's because it's just isolating the AC unit from what is around it.
The main objective is isolating all the exhaust to not be able to feed back into the AC at all. So it all has to go out that exhaust window that we made.
This box has a bottom, 2 sides, and a top. There's no back to it. And this was to save a little bit of space. The back of our box is the back of the overhead compartment. It butts right up to the fiberglass. And on the left side of the box, we used a hole saw to drill a hole right into the middle of that wall. The big 6-inch flange got attached to the outside of that, and the flexible ducting attached to the flange, and then eventually to the vent. But this was to bring in the fresh air through that tubing and into the box. On the back of the box, both the walls and the ceiling, we used a garage door sealant.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, it was some sort of weather sealing rubber strip.
Yeah.
It was really wide. I think it was almost 3 inches wide.
Mm-hmm.
And we wrapped it around the edges of the back of the box so that when you pushed it up against the fiberglass, it kind of sealed itself onto all the fiberglass, creating a compartment.
It was easier to not put it back on and then cut the boards according to the curve.
Yes, we had to do curved
Yeah.
edges to the box because shuttle bus life.
Yeah.
Everything is curved in here. I did have to make a template for that curve. I made it out of cardboard and then just traced it onto the wood. I hope for you that you are putting this AC unit into a perfectly square compartment because that would be the dream.
It'd be a lot easier. The other main component of building this was the dividing walls between the 3 parts of the AC unit. Really the whole key to making this work, because this is meant to be pushed out a window, or that's doing all that with fresh air constantly being out there, we had to try to isolate those as much as possible.
The dividers are essentially the shape of a picture frame. They are the dimensions of the interior of the box, so they slip right in there really snug, and then with the weather stripping on the inside, it allows the AC unit to push through it, but the weather stripping kind of drags with it and then seals it wherever it stops. Once we had our box fully constructed, we set it into the compartment and lined up where our vents needed to sit. So we kind of put the rectangular exhaust vent just dead center in the middle of the box, and then it wasn't so crucial where the intake vent went. but we just placed it where it looked good on the side of the bus. We had some unfortunate constraints with our system in particular and where it had to be placed. This overcab compartment was the only spot in this bus that it could be placed. And that's because we didn't want to put it near the floor because cold air falls.
Yep.
Hot air rises, cold air falls.
Yep.
You don't want your AC right next to the floor. This was the highest point that we had space. We couldn't put it in the back because we don't have enough room over top of that window. And unfortunately, that vent did have to go right in the front. We know it's not ideal, but we have made that weather sealing cover for it, and it's worked really well.
It's working.
We haven't had any leaks so far.
Yeah, the other problem is it's slightly angled too, which is even worse.
We lined up both the vents, we traced around the edges, we drilled the holes, and used a jigsaw to cut both of those holes. And besides the vent fan, those are the largest holes that we have put in this bus.
Yep, had a couple mini heart attacks out of stress.
It's always very nerve-wracking.
Of course, it rained, I think, the day we did that, right? Yeah. Before we were able to completely seal it yet. So there's water coming in right away, and then, like, that's fitting.
Of course, we used butyl tape to seal around the edges of all the vents. If you've been watching our videos, we love us some butyl tape.
Oh, yeah.
We use it for a lot of things, and that's because it works really well. It's also sort of adhesive. So we took the butyl tape, we stuck the vents into each of the holes, but that was our next issue because that compartment over our cab is just fiberglass. It doesn't have any sort of metal or wood framing in it, so we had to add that.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to screw directly into a piece of fiberglass that's pretty thin. It'll hold for a bit, but it'll wear out over time with vibration. So you need to put some sort of framing behind, and what we did was just we put wood there.
The round vent got sort of a little frame. We cut a square that was larger than the vent, used the hole saw again to drill out the middle, and then placed that around the vent. So it's not connected to the frame of the bus, but the vent is very light, so it didn't need an intense amount of support. It just needed something else for the screws to grab into and pull to secure that vent to the outside. The rectangular vent was another story. Because we don't have a back to the box, we decided to make the supports for this rectangular vent part of the box to help kind of stabilize the back of it. We used 1x3s, one on the top and one on the bottom of the vent to kind of brace it. 2 pocket holes on each side, and those got screwed in to kind of suck the box together. So now the back of the box is the support that we need for that vent without adding any extra plywood, because plywood's $1 million these days. So the 1x3s were a better option, and then we secured the vent right from the outside inward, and it sucked everything together, and it was all secured to itself.
Yeah, we went with the machine screws because we had access to the backside to put a lock washer on them and a lock nut. So it just a little more grab than just a screw. The next step was to slide in the back dividing wall, and then we were ready to put the drain on for the AC and secure that with a cinch clamp. We were able to run a hose down the side wall here so that drain hose can go all the way to the ground outside. So unfortunately, for whatever reason, with this AC, though it had a spot for a drain hose connector, it did not have that in there. So we had to weld and make a little little drain connector.
Most likely your unit is going to come with one of these connectors, but if it doesn't, on the downloadable plan, we found one that you can buy that's really, really similar to what we made. Now that we had our box built, we had both of our vents cut and secured, we had the ducting run and the drain tube was run, it was time to set the AC unit into the box and put the front divider on. All we had to do was just push that in because like we said, both the dividers were made to be removable. So we pushed it over it until it was secured with all the weather sealing. And this is when we installed the waterproof door on the outside. As Drew said, rain was coming that day.
Yeah.
So we cut a piece of aluminum, we painted both the hinges and the door white because the outside of our bus is white, and we installed all of that on top with some weather stripping around the outside of the door. We had two kind of tension latches.
Yep.
And we put those on the top so the door opens downward. We did that so that we didn't need a strut to hold the door up.
Right.
I don't know if that was lazy or smart. Who knows? So now all you have to do is swing the door up, latch to the two latches, and it presses the weather sealing against the bus. We did caulk the outside of both the intake and exhaust vents with a marine grade sealant, and that helped a lot.
Yeah. That just fills in any gaps that there might still be after you do the butyl tape. We also did put a gutter above it to divert as much of the rainwater as possible. We have these around all of our windows. They're these little gutters that are just adhesive. They go on. Honestly, those alone, just with any sealing issues, are pretty huge. You're probably diverting 90-something% of the water, or almost all of it, unless it's really coming down.
We've had a few different days of rain since we installed it, and I've checked every time. There's been no leaking.
Yeah, that's great. Once all that was finished, we were ready to start running some tests. First thing we noticed was a bit of condensation. We thought this would probably happen, so we went ahead and hit all the wood with Red Guard, just so if there's a little bit of moisture in there, it can evaporate from the vents being there, but just so it doesn't soak into the wood before that happens. Now let's get to the part everybody came to see. How much power does it use, and what do we need to run it? First thing we did was plug it into that kilowatt. It's a little watt reading thing, so we weren't getting any of our other devices in the house influencing what that number was. And we saw it was surging, around 18 and 1900 watts when you first turn it on.
Twice, yep.
Does that twice. It kicks on, it'll run it just a couple hundred watts, then it'll kick up to about 1900, then it'll settle back down, then it kicks up again, and then after that it runs, it doesn't surge anymore. And it slowly went from around 400, topped out about 500.
Yeah.
I don't think we ever got to the 550 max that it's rated for. So it was running I would say it was running around 500 watts most of the time for a few hours. Once again, if it's not as hot, it's probably not going to work quite as hard, so it might be a little lower watt draw. But we did find that 500 is a good number. I would still go with the 550 when I'm doing any calculations as far as battery capacity. I know a lot of people are going to be wondering, well, okay, yeah, that, but what do I need to run an AC? Well, it's like anything else in your bus. You got to figure out what the watt draw is. For this one, we found the max is 550, so we're going to go with that as the biggest number, which means it's taking 550 watts per hour from your battery bank. And that doesn't include any efficiency of inversion from 12 volts to 110, which there's a little bit of loss there as well. So you have to then do the math from there. If I want to run it for 4 hours at night, and it's 550 watts per hour, that's going to give me 2,200 watts that I've then depleted. So I need at least that much of usable capacity in my battery. That's not going to be your full capacity. You always want to have more than that. Depending on if you have lead acid or lithium, that changes. You can look up, there's a lot of debate on exactly what percentage you should run that at, but need to know that now I've depleted 2,200 watts from a 4-hour run period in the evening when there was no solar energy coming in. So the next day, you will need to create a surplus of 2,200 watts to recharge everything that you used while it's still, all the other stuff is still pulling power. So ideally, like with everything on this, if you have the space for more panels, do it. If you have the money or the space for a bit bigger battery bank, you're going to want to do that too. But you'll have to figure out what those numbers mean for you. If it's a bigger AC unit, it's going to be a little more power, and you may have to decide, well, what I have available, I can run the thing for either during the day and kind of break even, or if you're lucky enough, you can actually recharge your batteries and feed the AC. But if you can't do that, you have to decide, okay, I have 4 hours, I can run it, and I'm going to choose to run it when I'm going to bed just to take the edge off, and I know tomorrow's going to be sunny and my batteries will be charged back up. But that's kind of a personal system to system thing, but that's the basic concept behind all of that. You have to figure that out for yourself.
Now we are on to the actual temperature testing of this unit. And again, this is one of the smallest window AC units that you can buy. I did not have high hopes for this. Our bus is 115 square feet, but with all of the windows, I was pretty skeptical as to what it would do.
Right.
And again, we are in New York State. We're on an East Coast summer. We're battling humidity, not necessarily super hot temperatures. So we are not in the Southwest. We just can't test it right now at those 115 degree temperatures. So we tested it with what we could. We did 3 daytime tests of this unit, and if you want the full charts and numbers, those will be in the downloadable plan. I put them all out into charts, every single number and degree. But in general, during the day, an average of 83 degrees outside with around 55% humidity, it was reducing the internal temperature of the bus 7 to 10 degrees on average. So it was starting with an 85 degree internal temperature in the bus and reducing it to 75 degrees, which was pretty good, but there was a little bit of a swing. It wouldn't bring it down 10 degrees every time. It was very dependent on the time of the day, how sunny it was, if it was partially cloudy, if it was full on sun. So on average, it dropped it 7 to 10 degrees, which is pretty good for a unit this small.
Yeah, on the sunny days, we found that it would knock off that initial 4 or 5 degrees at the top pretty quickly, and then slowly trickle down after that, but kind of hit a breaking point at maybe 6 or 7 degrees just from all the radiant heat of the sun. And I think the BTU rating, I think that's just basically what that BTU rating could do, with particularly the lack of insulation when you're talking about all the windows in here.
We did 2 evening tests, which was one of the biggest things that we were trying to design this system for, was to use it to cool the bus down at night before we went to bed, as we mentioned before. So we did 2 tests where we were essentially in the shade because the sun was really low in the sky. And for both of those tests, the AC unit reduced the internal temperature of the bus 11 to 14 degrees, which I think that's really good as well, because that feels like a really significant difference.
Yeah.
During the daytime, the 7-ish degrees that it would take off of the temperature, I was a little disappointed. I almost didn't notice that much, but the almost 15 degrees in the evening felt luxurious.
Yeah. I'll tell you what though, there in the day, as soon as you turn it off, you definitely notice how much it was doing. It maybe didn't get to that point of ooh, it's so chilly where I'm really happy with it, but the humidity, it's doing so much of that. So if it's, say, 85 outside and it's even 80, 81 in here, but it's not humid, because that thing filters, I think 1.5 pints per hour or something it's rated for, you definitely feel that.
Even when we turned the AC unit off just to start making this video, I could feel the humidity
Yeah.
coming back into the bus. And I was so focused on the temperature drop that I really didn't realize how much humidity it was taking out of the bus until a few days in, when I could start to feel how humid it would get when you would turn it off.
Yeah, as soon as you shut it off to start the video, even though it was maybe 5 degrees cool in here and it felt pretty good, you really felt it. Like, whoa, it's so humid out. But when that's running, it's very dry in here. And, 80 degrees that's dry is actually very comfortable. If you ever lived in, the Southwest, if you lived in Arizona and Utah, you know that as long as you're not in the direct sunlight, even upwards to 100 isn't too bad. Whereas 80 back east or in the South, when that humidity is 50% to 100%, it's brutal. So that part alone is definitely really nice.
If any of you guys are in the South or you're in the Northeast, you're battling that humidity, having an AC unit like this could just be worth its weight in gold for taking the humidity out of your bus.
Yeah, it does help a lot.
We have come to the end. What are our final thoughts?
Our final thoughts are, I think we need a little more BTUs
I think so too.
for the space. But I do feel like maybe just the next size up will be more than enough. We won't know until we try that. It is doing a good job now and definitely doing the job at night like we had hoped. But I think for during the day, it just needs a bit more because of all the radiant heat from the sun.
One of the biggest things that you can do, both for heat and for AC in a shuttle bus, is to get Reflectix window covers. We realized with this AC unit just how much of the cold air was just bleeding out of the windows.
Yeah.
So I think this unit would function a little bit better for us if we covered the windows, but ultimately, I would like to try the 6,000 BTU unit.
I think both things. I bet the Reflectives alone, but probably a couple degrees, I would guess. Just keeping a little more heat out, and also it's just another layer that's keeping the cool air in a bit. So we'll have to test those things and let you know what happens.
The final verdict, our system that we installed, the artificial environment box and how we vented it, it works beautifully. It works exactly how we need it to work. It doesn't stick out the back of the bus. It runs on solar. So we accomplished all those things, but the unit itself, I think, needs to go up to 6,000 BTU.
Yep, we'll try that next, and we'll probably let you guys know. I'm excited to keep running it and testing it and maybe tweaking anything to improve it, but it's working. It definitely is ventilating, which is the main thing, and I've noticed that primarily with the watt consumption. Once it's settled, it actually was under 500 watts most of the time. So I think if it wasn't ventilating well enough, one, you wouldn't be getting any cool air. Two, it would be working so hard to be pushing its watt to the max the whole time. And it wasn't doing that, so that does encourage me that it is venting enough.
With all that being said, I think that we accomplished all the goals that we set out to accomplish. And if you build this, feel free to make alterations because it is very unlikely that your space is going to be exactly like ours. So feel free to make your own changes and alter things as you need to. You don't have to stick to it, to a T.
Yeah.
But I think the basics of the design are something that we're really proud of, and we're excited to hear what you think.
All right, guys, we need to go ahead and get out of here so we can put the AC back on because it's pretty sticky.
Yes, it is. And there is a downloadable plan that accompanies this entire video. If you want to build this yourself, definitely go ahead and get that because it gives you a full materials list with links to everything that we used. It goes through everything part by part, step by step, down to each little minute detail. So if you want to build this, go check that out. The link is in the description below. Do all those things that you do on the internet. We're going to get out of here and turn this AC unit on.
Yep.
We'll see you next time.
Later.